Já, meira þessu seinna í þættinum. En fyrst að forvörnum gegn kynferðisbrotum. Á ráðstefnu Blátt áfram sem hefst á morgun verður sérstaklega vakin athygli á hegðunarmynstri barnaníðinga. Bandaríski sálfræðingurinn Carla van Dam hefur helgað stórun hluta ferilsins athugunum á aðferðum barnaníðinga og hvernig best að koma í veg fyrir að þeir nái að beita börn kynferðisofbeldi, en rannsóknir hafa sýnt að gerendur yfirleitt fólk sem foreldrar þekkja og treysta. En hvernig þekkjast þeir úr? Brynja settist niður með Körlu fyrr í dag.
Welcome, Dr. Carla van Dam.
Thank you.
You are here in Iceland to talk about primary prevention techniques.
Correct.
Which are essential to stopping child sexual abuse.
Correct.
You say that we should approach this problem like an epidemic.
Well, it is an epidemic. The research would say that anywhere from a third to a fifth of the population have all been molested, and those who have not been themselves molested or certainly have relationships with those who have been abused or are in relationship with people who are offending. So everybody is touched by it in one way or another.
Do we not as a society take this problem seriously enough?
We don't know what to do with it because of our own discomfort with the topic. So even though we talk openly about sexual matters in terms of having movies with sex in them or all sorts of other things, when it comes to sexual matters with people who are molesting our children, we get so uncomfortable that our discomfort and unease allows us to ignore what we should be doing to protect children from having prevent people who are molesters from having access to our children.
Mm. But how do we identify them? This is a subject you're going to talk about.
Correct. I'm going to talk about how we can change our perspective and how we can start to identify them by seeing their behavior patterns, because actually their habits, they all do the same things. The ones who are more sophisticated do it better or with more sophisticated targets, but they all use the same behaviors to engage them, to become engaging and engage themselves in the adult community so that they can have access to kids. And these are the groomers that we talk about, not the stranger danger or the grabbers.
Yeah. The groomers, you say, are they the majority?
They are the majority.
molesters?
Over 95% of child sexual abuse is by people who we have invited, unwittingly have invited into our homes, our communities, our schools, our churches. And we give the offender carte blanche because we are just unwilling, unable, too embarrassed, too uncomfortable to do anything about the signs and signals that should say this person's behavior isn't acceptable. And you don't have to prove that they're a sex offender. All you can do is say, these behaviors are not okay.
And which behaviors are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about all sorts of boundary violations, so that they may end up, the most common ones is if you look at the identifying child molesters, that's the one where I've identified the behavior habits that molesters all agree that they engage in, which includes becoming too helpful. They're always there to help babysit, always available to take care of your child for you, and it's not a reciprocal relationship like it would be where, if you have friends where one weekend they babysit and another weekend you babysit, but it balances out. They're just too good to be true, and consumer advocates always say if something's too good to be true, it's not true. In the case of these molesters, they're so helpful because it gives them access to kids. And then on top of that, they engage in all sorts of behaviors that violate rules of the family. And of course, families and schools and organizations need to have policies in place for everybody's protection, to make sure nobody gets falsely accused and to protect the kids. So if you have people who don't follow the rules, then why would you give them access to your children?
But all this is a subject of evaluation. It's somewhat shady. How can you be sure? How can you avoid being over-suspicious towards everybody around you?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think you end up being overly suspicious, because what happens is that if people don't have access to your child for one outing or another, or they don't follow your rules, and you say, well, let's not do that. If you're setting some clear boundaries and they're in it for the wrong reasons, they'll go away because they don't want to waste their time places where they're not going to get access to kids. So setting boundaries and being really clear will sort of screen these folks out anyway, and then they'll go to the next target. And so if everybody sets clear boundaries, then there won't be any place where they can engage in those kind of habits.
But we have to come to terms with the fact that these are people that we trust, that are trying to make us trust them, at least.
We have to consider the possibility that anybody who's interested in our kids may be there for all the wrong reasons. And that doesn't mean we don't have meaningful relationships and trust people. It means that it's just a possibility. The same way that women used to carry their purses a different way, and then we learned that people are pickpockets, and so women learned to carry their purses over their shoulders. It doesn't mean that they expect everybody to be a pickpocket. It's just a safety precaution. We used to not have seatbelts in cars, and now we have standards of seatbelts to protect the children, well, to protect everybody. And so when you have a friend pick up your child and they don't have seatbelts and you say, I need my child to be belted, it doesn't mean that you're accusing them of being a bad driver. You're just saying this is a safety standard. This is how we operate.
You compare this to washing off germs. And this is true because there was a time where we couldn't see any germs.
Correct. In fact, the first doctor who recommended washing hands between surgical procedures was drummed out of the profession because people couldn't believe, even though the data showed that his patients didn't die, they couldn't see whatever it was that was being washed, and so they said this is ridiculous, and they drummed him out of the profession. But making that one change in medicine made a huge shift in health, in public health. And this is the same thing, is that we need to consider the possibility that not everybody, of course, but certain folks are going to be attracted to interacting with our children and will ingratiate themselves with us to get access to our kids. And we should stop that and not give them free access.
You also point out that the socially skilled child molesters, which are the majority, they always leave a trail of evidence.
Everywhere you go, there are people who say, you know, he made me feel uncomfortable, I didn't like the way he was with my kids, and they tend to try to avoid contact, but they don't know what to do with that information, so they often do nothing. When I do assessments on known sex offenders, I always ask them, were you ever falsely accused? And they'll say, oh, you can't believe the number of times that people have accused me. And most people who aren't misbehaving don't have that experience. So everywhere they go, there are boundary violations. They engage in touching or tickling or some kind of activity that makes people uncomfortable.
So this maybe isn't as hidden as we think.
It is not hidden, actually. It's very visible if you're willing to look. And that's the whole point, is that we as the adult community have to be willing to look at the data and consider the possibility. And when it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, acts like a duck, looks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And we don't have to prove it. We just quit giving them access.
Yeah. We don't accuse, but we intervene.
Exactly.
How do we do that? How do we...
We quit making our children available. We don't accept offers for babysitting. We disinvite them to coach on our children's teams if they won't follow the rules of the organization. We disinvite them to teach in the schools if they won't follow the basic personnel policy rules. And then it basically makes the world a little less safe for the offenders. We stop enabling and protecting the sex offenders.
Dr. Carla van Dam, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Já, Carla heldur erindi og með vinnustofu á ráðstefnu blátt áfram sem haldin verður í háskólanum í Reykjavík á morgun og föstudag. Ráðstefnan öllum opin, en